Jen Psaki tries to make this distinction between a quid pro quo that is related to a political interest versus a quid pro quo that is related to a national interest or in the interest of our country. My question to you, we read this transcript. We know President Trump asked for a favor relating to investigations into meddling in the United States presidential election from 2016. How on earth could a Democrat argue that that is only in Trump's political interest and that knowing who and what and how foreign entities meddled in our presidential election is not in the interest of our country?
Well, it's obviously in the interest of our country, but this is the argument they're trying to make. And this is why they're doing this entire impeachment process in secret, because they know if this testimony was made public, their narrative would start to unravel. Because you have numerous agency officials, administration officials testifying, many times saying there was no quid pro quo. We were legitimately looking into election meddling. This doesn't fit their narrative, so they're doing it in secret. But what's interesting about this whole thing is that, of course, we use quid pro quos all the time. That is what foreign aid is. And the most stunning, glaring example of this is actually Joe Biden on camera saying that he threatened to hold up $1 billion of Ukrainian aid to the country of Ukraine, unless they fired their prosecutor because he was corrupt. The prosecutor who, by the way, was investigating his son, Hunter Biden. But of course, Democrats don't want to talk about that because, we don't talk about that now because Joe Biden is running for president.
Well, that's even an example of the first example that Jen Psaki on CNN made when she said quid pro quos, when they're used as levers for your own political gain, or I suppose personal gain. In the case of Joe Biden on that video, he didn't want both his own political interests or his son, the personal interests of his son to be damaged by this prosecutor in the Ukraine. That's an example of the first kind of quid pro quo, the kind that's probably inappropriate. The second kind, as it relates to the national interest, corruption that's happening in other countries, especially when it involves our election process or individuals who are American citizens, that is in the interest of our country. And I don't understand how Democrats can deny, after telling us that Russian meddling is a threat to our democracy and hacking Mitch McConnell for not bringing up their so-called election security bill in the Senate. After all of that rhetoric, how can they possibly argue that President Trump shouldn't be doing everything he can to get to the bottom of what happened in 2016?
Well, and this is one of the levers of power that we have as the United States. Being the richest country in the world gives us this kind of power over other countries who are dependent on our aid. We can then compel their behavior on issues that are important to us. And that transcript shows President Trump pulling that lever of power, as has every president before him, to say, look, on this issue of election meddling, which, as you point out, is incredibly high stakes, we need Ukrainian cooperation. We could ask them for it, but the way that we can actually compel their behavior is by holding up aid or by saying, hey, we need you to do this in exchange for X. That is how diplomacy is done across the world. I don't care what Jen Psaki says. I also know people in the State Department that will tell you, yes, we do use our aid, our leverage, to compel behavior from our international partners, as do every other country in the world and every other president besides President Trump.